I think it was in 1951 that General Douglas MacArthur said that in battle there is no substitute for victory. But that was a different century. I think that what we saw throughout the current century is that nobody wins a glorious victory, and nobody is completely defeated. Look at the Americans in Afghanistan and then Iraq. And I think that this is going to be repeated in the two scenarios that both the President and the Minister of Foreign Affairs addressed. That is, you may remember that President Zelensky came forward with a 10 points piece, which essentially was about the capitulation of Russia. And I thought at the time that this was inconceivable. Russia has much more capabilities, many more capabilities than Ukraine. You can see today the fatigue in Europe. I think that Europe has rightly romanticized the early days of Ukraine's standing because the challenge was enormous. I mean, what the Ukrainians were trying to do is to get away from the grip of Russia and from the powers of history and geography that have kept Ukraine for 15 centuries as part of the Russian orbit. So that the challenge was gigantic, was meta-historical practically. So, and at the beginning, it looked as if they can resist. But you see today that there is a waning of the patriotic fervor in Ukraine. There is a problem with recruitment. There is a lot of desertion. This is the reality. There is a social crisis, not to speak of the infrastructure and the damage that the war is causing materially. So I think that to think of a Ukrainian victory when we have the geopolitical effects of a second Trump victory is unrealistic. And therefore, let us see what the Russians will do. We saw today that he has changed the norms or the rules of engagements with nuclear weapons. I don't believe he will use them, because why should he if he's waiting for Trump to solve for him part of the problem? I think that the shape of peace will inevitably be the result of the conditions on the ground, the geopolitical changes that will be happening in the wake of Trump's presidency, and evident fatigue in Europe. The other day, the Germans say that they are freezing assistance to Ukraine. Scholz has called after 2 years. I don't know if to ask politely Putin to stop the war or pleading with him to stop the war. Nobody saw the transcript of the conversation. So I think that given this situation, what I believe is first, indeed, freezing. This is what already Trump has proposed, freezing the front line, and then having some sort of a solution that I believe will be a very serious blow to the Ukrainians, and that is that territorially the solution will have to take into consideration the territorial advances of Russia, and some sort of probably neutrality. That was the last thing that Henry Kissinger proposed before at the beginning of the war. Austria Cold War style condition for Ukraine, which and mitigating Ukraine's tragedy really is a full incorporation into the European Union. But the European Union has here a major task, not to repeat with Ukraine what they did with the Western Balkans, because in the Western Balkans, the pledges were made many years back, and there are still, I imagine, advances, etc., but there is quite a lot of disappointment over there. The same about Israel-Palestine. Netanyahu started with grandiloquent declarations about total victory. I mean, the Palestinians are going nowhere. I mean, that's not, there isn't a solution that is not political. At the end of the day, you need to sit and negotiate. The problem is that the coalition of the prime minister is such that makes war into an infinite affair. The coalition would dissolve the moment you put on the table a political deal. Lebanon, I think that the minister was absolutely right that it's a different problem, and there is a scheme that can reactivate it, the 1701. But my only comment, if I may, to the foreign minister is say that the international community has is sort of achieving this movement in this diplomatic movement. Well, that's not the case. It is Israel that has done it. The other day I saw Fouad Senora, a former prime minister of Lebanon, lashing at Israel, understandably. There's no problem. He's Lebanese, I can understand that. But at the same time saying that, but now we have an opportunity to rebuild Lebanon. Why? Because of UN Security Council resolutions? It was not abided by. Why? Because of the international community? No, because Israel decided to respond. So wars sometimes have some utilities. The problem is that if you turn it into an infinite affair and you don't strive for a political solution, it becomes a nihilistic enterprise for unending violence. And this is what is happening when you have a coalition in Israel that cannot think of the day after in diplomatic terms. I think that the hidden agenda of the government is to practically have control over northern Gaza, that is, to have military control of northern Gaza. Let us hope that they do not go beyond the military control and start settling as the far right in the coalition expects, settling northern Gaza. And then you have the minister rightly said, the West Bank. This is a coalition. Israel has today a coalition where Netanyahu, who is seen internationally as a radical, as an extremist, is in fact at the center of the coalition because he's a centrist compared with his allies on the far right. These are people that believe that this war is a miracle. This is what they believe. It is a miracle, you see, because in Jewish eschatology, the Messiah is supposed to arrive after a major catastrophe. So this is a catastrophe that announces the coming of the Messiah. For these guys, I mean, the Smotrich and Ben Gvir, this is what they believe. So this is a recipe for permanent conflict, and that Israel cannot win. You can win a war against an army. You can hardly win against a terrorist organization because asymmetric wars have never been won by the stronger power. Look, in Afghanistan, the Russians and the Americans. In Vietnam, the Americans. I know the case of Colombia, where I was involved with President Santos in the negotiations with the guerrilla, that eventually the war was not won and you needed to sit down and negotiate. So eventually a peace deal needs to be put on the table for the Israelis and the Palestinians. It was right, I think, to mention the question of the two-state solution. But again, I would like to discuss this with the Prime Minister, with the Foreign Minister, and tell him that this has become a religion of wrath. It is a cliche that we have been repeating our entire life. It didn't happen because it is not deliverable. The best explanation I saw why it is not deliverable was in the memoirs by Roger Cohen. He wrote, "It is not deliverable because it is not deliverable. We have tried it many, many times in far better conditions. But the Israeli political system has shifted radically to the extreme right. And the Palestinians are it isn't an entity anymore. They are split, fragmented. The PA is incompetent, and not only because of occupation. Corrupt, incompetent, with no legitimacy whatsoever among the Palestinian people themselves. So how are you going to build a two-state reality there? We are in a blind alley that makes it almost suicidal for both parties. I have a solution, but nobody wants to hear it right now. Down the road, we might find it. I believe that eventually, when a centrist government, because a left-wing government in Israel, it is unrealistic to happen. You won't see a left-wing government, the kind of governments that Rabin, Barak, and or even Olmert. So a centrist government in Israel would understand that we are heading into self-extinction, the Jewish state, if it becomes a permanent occupier in the West Bank. This will be self-extinction. It will become a South African reality without a South African solution. Because assuming that the Jewish minority will hand over power to the Arab majority is far-fetched. It won't happen. It will be a state of permanent civil war, the one-state reality that many people and good people that understand the situation preach for a one-state reality. So I think that a centrist government, to prevent that, would pursue the plan that Ariel Sharon started to implement. The late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon withdrew from Gaza and began withdrawing from the West Bank as well. And when Olmert came to office, he came to office on a convergence plan. Again, withdrawing unilaterally from the bulk of the West Bank. When this happens, I believe that the Jordanians will be drawn into the West Bank, and the plan for a Jordanian-Palestinian state was always on the table. The Jordanians never approved the decision of King Hussein of 1988 to hand over the West Bank to the Palestinians. So I think that this might be the sequence. If Israel decides at some point to prevent her suicide, that is becoming a binational state. It didn't happen here in Cyprus. You had to split. It didn't happen in Yugoslavia. Why would it happen between Israelis and Palestinians? So at some point, you will see, I believe, unilateral withdrawal. That's my last sentence. That is, nobody is winning a total victory in this war, and nobody can expect a consummate peace and harmony. That's the reality, both in Ukraine and both in Israel-Palestine. In Ukraine, the blow would be such, if indeed they relinquish territory, that you will see a major internal crisis in Ukraine. The Russians, even if they take part of the territory, they will face. Ukraine has a long tradition of guerrilla warfare. They know how to do it, and there will be a very serious problem for the Russian occupier.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.